So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the episodes pretty much like a regular review show. I'll give my opinions on what I think of each scene and changes from the books and things like that. But I'm going to try to focus specifically on filling in a lot of the sort of side stories and extra information from the books that help you to understand some of the plot points from the show a bit better. Because, let's face it, Game of Thrones is very complicated. It's thousands of pages, hundreds of characters, hundreds of different interactions going on between them all. And even if you've read the books, it's pretty likely that you're going to miss out on a lot of that information on the first pass. So if you don't want to sit down and read 4 or 5,000 pages, it'll be nice maybe to just have someone who's read the book fill in those little details for you to allow you to make a bit more sense of what's going on in each episode. So the first scene I want to talk about is this scene with the Mountain 3.0. And side note to the show creators, there are these things called contracts. You can get actors to sign them so that they're not allowed to, randomly leave to be in Lord of the Rings or Transporter series. Just an idea. um, anyway, uh, this scene is pretty unclear. They don't tell you what's going on. It doesn't happen in the books. What I believe is happening here, I may be totally wrong, is that the Mountain is executing petty criminals, and just because he's the Mountain and he's a sadist and it's amusing to him, he gives them weapons and a little, sense of false hope so that he can get more enjoyment out of murdering them. So the next scene that I think needs a little bit of explanation is the interaction between Rorge, Biter, Arya, and the Hound. This scene is not in the books either, and frankly, I'm not a big fan of this. I liked everything up to the point where Biter bites the Hound, but after that, it really went downhill, I think. So let's look at who Rorge and Biter are first, and then talk just briefly about this scene. Rorge and Biter, as a lot of you probably remember, are criminals that were picked up by Yoren at King's Landing towards end of Season 1, start of Season 2. Their story is that they are criminals from the illegal fighting pits in King's Landing. And Rorge is... There's nothing particularly odd about him. He's your kind of run-of-the-mill criminal bad guy. Biter, on the other hand, is a really interesting character. He has had his tongue cut out, and he's filed his teeth into points. So the idea, I guess, is basically that because he has a mouthful of shark teeth, his bite does far more damage than a normal person's bite with, flat molars. And that sort of explains why he bites the Hound. He's sort of a crazy guy. This is the way that he's learned to fight in the fighting pits, and his bite is particularly damaging. It does not explain why the guy with the sword doesn't attack the Hound first. And the only explanation I can give you is that it's just not very good writing, and it's a mistake on the part of the show writers. It's not in the books. George R. R. Martin wouldn't have written anything this confusing and nonsensical. And Rorge and Biter just have a much more interesting story arc in the books, and it's disappointing to me that this is what they've done with those characters. It doesn't make much sense, and it's not nearly as interesting as what happens in the books. Now, this next scene, I think, judging by the reviews and the discussion that I've seen about the episode, this interaction between Alistair Thorne and Jon Snow about plugging up the tunnel seems to be the thing in the episode that confuses people the most. Um, and I think I can shed quite a bit of light on this interaction and why Alistair Thorne is so adamant that they shouldn't freeze the tunnel. So there's a couple of things that are important to know about this little interaction between Alistair Thorne and Jon Snow. It's not just that Alistair Thorne hates Jon Snow and he wants to go against whatever Jon suggests just for the sake of being an asshole. He does hate Jon Snow and he is an asshole, but he actually has legitimate reason for not wanting to plug the tunnel up. So this is something that they talk about in the books relatively extensively, and I believe it's only mentioned very briefly once, sometime in season 3 by Tormund Giantsbane right before they're about to climb the wall. Basically, he mentions that the Night's Watch used to cut the trees down for miles in front of the wall, but since their numbers have dwindled and the Night's Watch doesn't have the respect that it had anymore, and as a result of that, it doesn't get the recruits that it used to get anymore. They don't cut the trees down anymore. They don't have the manpower to do it. The wall is absolutely massive. There's 19 forts spanning the wall, and only 3 of them are occupied. So the trees that they used to cut down are encroaching on the wall, and they have no visibility now as a result of that. So if an army marches on the wall, that army is going to be marching under the cover of the forest, and the Night's Watch won't have any advance notice of the attack. So they need the tunnel to go north of the wall in order to keep an eye on what the wildlings are doing, to see if anyone's about to attack the wall, things like that. So Thorne has a good point here when he says you'd take our legs and our eyes from us. Like, if the wildlings attack, they're not going to know about it until they're within a matter of feet of the wall. They're just going to pop out of the forest and start attacking. However, Jon has obviously a stronger point when he says that we can't guard this thing against 100,000 people and an army of giants and mammoths and all this shit. So hopefully that'll clear up a little bit why Alistair Thorne is even objecting to this idea in the first place, and why he feels it's important for them to be able to go north of the wall. The next scene we get with Bronn and Tyrion is pretty straightforward, and there's really not much backstory to add to it. But at one point, Bronn does mention that he's marrying Lolly Stokeworth, and I thought it might be fun to just give a little bit of background information on this character, because she doesn't appear in the shows at all, and she's featured fairly prominently in the books. Although I totally understand why they got rid of her. She's not really a necessary character, and a lot of the functions that she fills in the books are filled by other people in the show more easily, and it's, why not cut a character that you don't really need if you can get away with it. That being said, though, let's just talk a little bit about who Lolly's is in the book. So, Lolly Stokeworth is the daughter of a relatively minor noble household, and in the book she's described as being morbidly obese and I don't remember exactly what words they use, but let's just say educationally subnormal. So throughout the first couple books, Lolly's mother is just desperately trying to marry her off to anyone that she can. And this includes pursuing Tyrion for a while, actually, as a match for Lolly's, which she's unsuccessful, obviously, in doing, since she ends up marrying Bronn eventually. So Lolly's main function in the books is to act basically as Shay's cover in the way that Sansa does in the show. Shay becomes Lolly's handmaiden and not Sansa's. And the other big mention that we have of Lolly's is during the riot at King's Landing. So this is way back in season 2, when after they send Myrcella off to Dorne, the commoners throw a cow pie at Joffrey and he orders to have them all killed, and a riot ensues. Well, in the books, Lolly's is dragged off of her horse and taken behind a tanner's shop and raped repeatedly. Like, they claim upwards of 50 times in the books. And this results in her getting pregnant and having a bastard, who ultimately ends up being Bronn's son. So, poor Lollies. She's one of many very unfortunate characters in this world who really gets the short end of the stick in life. She's not too important, but I figured, she's an interesting character, and why not just fill you in on her backstory a little bit.